So I'll hand over to them. Thank you so much, Gemma and Molly.
Thanks very much, Ashley. I will just share the presentation. And we'll go from beginning. Okay, lovely. Thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak to you all about Power to Kids. I'd like to start also by acknowledging country and pay my respects to elders past and present, and to First Nations colleagues with us today. Particular respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and young people in out-of-home care who we, work with every day. I also just want to do a little bit of a content warning, because child sexual abuse it's not an easy topic to talk about. Domestic family violence is not easy. It's not something that just happens out there. It's something that may have happened to some of us in this call, and the slides are jumping forward automatically, so apologies for that. So just to be aware that, if you do feel triggered by the material, please, practice your self-care or reach out to a friend. We're just really aware that this material is not necessarily easy to hear. So I guess I just wanted to say something about the out-of-home care context. And I'm not sure, how many of you in the room know what out-of-home care is. So, a very quick explanation is, when children are on child protection orders because of, abuse and neglect concerns, they are placed in either kinship care, which is with another family member, in foster care, which is usually with a family, not their own family, but a family in the community, or residential care. And residential care are like houses in the community where kids, usually up to 4 kids, live with youth workers who, and these houses are staffed 24/7. So we focused, Power to Kids is a program focused, or that began its focus on residential care, because kids in residential care are particularly vulnerable to sexual abuse. And I'm going to describe the forms of sexual abuse that they're particularly vulnerable to. But this data here, you can see from the Royal Commission, it's a bit outdated now. But, out of all the kids who are in out-of-home care, 5% of them, this is sort of in 2016, 5% of them were living in the residential care houses, and yet 33% of the reports to statutory child protection related to this 5% of children living in residential care in Australia. It's about 3,000 children. 33% of reports. It's a shocking statistic. And this is another slide that is sort of demonstrating that, in particular, the sexual exploitation of children in residential care is alarmingly high. And really it was, coming out of the Royal Commission, as well as these other reports that and inquiries that have been carried out, that we knew that was a really big problem, and we needed to do something to solve that problem. So these were some of the inquiries you know, as a good parent would, probably was the first one, which really was a dive by the Commissioner for Young People in Victoria, for children and young people, into residential care, and looked at the proportion of kids who were subject to sexual exploitation and harmful sexual behaviour. You're probably all familiar with the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse, which has a volume on out-of-home care. And then another report released more recently called Out of Sight, again by the Commissioner for Children and Young People here in Victoria, which actually really draws attention to the problem of children and young people going missing from out-of-home care. Because when kids go missing, that's one of the biggest red flags for sexual exploitation. So some of the findings from those inquiries that, you know, that sat behind the development of Power to Kids as a program, you know, is very little, you know, kids getting very little education about sexual health and safety, about sexuality, and kids in resi care are often not engaged necessarily with schools, so they're not accessing the sexuality education in schools, which isn't always all that helpful anyway. Another finding was around, you know, violent pornography and kids using pornography as a form of sexual education. And we know that there's, you know, there's now meta-analytic evidence supporting a link between viewing pornography and carrying out acts of sexual aggression. So we've got a real problem with pornography in kids in this country of ours. So obviously there was, you know, other findings around, you know, the need for guidelines, capacity building of staff and professionals in this space, and, you know, sort of urgent attention to the number of children and young people going missing from their placements, and, you know, that there some kind of multidisciplinary, you know, strategy to disrupt child sexual exploitation was required, and there has been work done around that in Victoria, and there's good work going on now, and I'll talk about that in a little while. So the development of Power to Kids, it really, you know, began in 2017. I'd just finished my PhD at that time, which was on the prevention of harmful sexual behaviour carried out by children and young people, and got together with Robin Miller, who had just become CEO of McKibbin Family Services. And Robin had come from the Royal Commission as she was doing part of the research team for the Research Commission. So Robin and plus had a, you know, decades-long career in the area of child sexual abuse prevention and response. So we formed an action research collaboration between University of Melbourne and McKibbin Family Services, and we used an action research process to you know, co-design a program that we thought might work to address these issues of abuse for children in residential care in the first instance, but also then in home-based care or foster care. So we developed this program, which I'll describe shortly, and we piloted in 4 residential care homes in Victoria. McKibbin is now really rolling out, and Molly will talk more about this later, rolling out Power to Kids across all of McKibbin residential care. The pilot into Power to Kids in foster care is completed, and we're in the very early stages of thinking about how to roll that out. Also, with the help from a Westpac grant, Power to Kids has been packaged up and is being made available to community service organisations who deliver residential care services for free. So, it's really sort of getting Power to Kids out there and hoping, and Molly will speak to this, hoping that we're making a difference in the lives of kids and reducing rates of sexual abuse. So Power to Kids focused on these three forms of abuse: harmful sexual behaviour, child sexual exploitation, and dating violence. And we wanted to target them all together because we actually find for kids in resi care, and even kids in the community, that often the three things are happening at the same time, or that there's some interlink between these three forms of abuse. So we wanted to tackle them as together. So just to kind of clarify for you what each of these forms of abuse are. So harmful sexual behaviour is sexual behaviour expressed by children under the age of 18, where that is potentially harmful towards other children, towards themselves, sometimes towards adults. It occurs across a continuum. So there's a continuum from, really normal and healthy sexual behaviour. All kids are sexual beings, but there are also kind of problematic behaviours that might be, masturbation in public space, say, in the public area of a residential care house, right up to very abusive behaviours where you might see a 16-year-old anally raping an 8-year-old. So there's a continuum of behaviours and a continuum of severity, and which also, of course, means that there's a continuum of responses that are needed. We need to respond to low-level behaviour in a very different way to we need to respond to the very high-level behaviour. So just thinking about, the things, harmful sexual behaviour, you might have heard, the language of juvenile sex offenders or adolescent perpetrators. We really don't use that language anymore. We try to not stigmatise children. Most children who develop harmful sexual behaviour have experienced significant childhood adversity, trauma, often their own sexual abuse, but not always by any means, but physical abuse, living with family violence, etc. So often they're victims, and this behaviour has developed as part of that victimisation. So child sexual exploitation is the second form of abuse. And really what we see in residential care is that it's mostly adult perpetrated, and it involves an element of exchange. So you've got these adult perpetrators, sometimes in the community around the child, other times more remote on social media, that are, coercing children and young people into sexual activity in exchange for something. So in residential care, it might be in exchange for drugs and alcohol. Sometimes it can be in exchange just for a sense of, attention or a false sense of love. So we often see the boyfriend model used, where kids actually think they're in a relationship with a much older perpetrator who is sexually exploiting them. Sorry, I've just realised that that had gone to dating violence. So in terms of the language, you know, you might, the notion of a child prostitute is probably what was used, you know, hopefully 100 years ago now. You know, we don't use words like that. We don't use language around absconding. We don't say children abscond from placement. We say that they go missing. They're not criminals, and they're not sexually exploiting themselves. So keeping the perpetrator in view in this space is really important, and not blaming the child for being sexually victimised. So dating violence is the third target area, and it's really like, you probably all know, like intimate partner violence, like domestic and family violence, but within young people's dating relationships. And, you know, we see it going both ways in terms of gender, particularly when kids are younger, girls and boys, and, you know, non-binary kids both, you know, can carry out dating violence against each other, but it becomes more gendered as the kids get older. So just moving on to the 3 prevention strategies, and then I'll get, then Molly can sort of bring some of this to light in terms of how it works in practice. So there are 3 strategies that make up the out-of-home, the Power to Kids program. And the first strategy is about educating children and young people about sexual health and safety, and using the Brave Conversation model to do that. And Molly will tell you about what the Brave Conversation model is and give you an example of that later. Really upskilling and training carers in, you know, a kind of whole of house, you know, respectful relationships way of being. So really paying attention to the culture of the house, making sure that it is, you know, that there's respect for gender equality, and that, you know, that you know, there's respect for, you know, consent. So all these things that make up what we would think of as a house where there's cultural safety and a culture of respect. There's also the sexual health and safety plans, which we found to be a real facilitator of the whole of the Power to Kids program, in fact. So just in terms of prevention strategy 2, this strategy sort of shifted over the course of the action research, and it started just as a missing from home strategy, but we've really sort of broadened it out with the use of the sexual health and safety plans to look at indicators and to teach carers what the indicators of those 3 forms of child sexual abuse or child abuse are. So, you know, thinking about, well, what is it, you know, how would I know if a child is, you know, sexually harming another child or at risk of sexually harming another child? You know, how would I know if a child is being sexually exploited? So what are the signs of that? And of course, you know, coming home with, gifts and, unexplained gifts, being on the phone with adults that, you don't know who they are. There's all kinds of indicators of these forms of abuse. So then there's really attention to the push and pull factors around sexual exploitation. So the push factors are those that push children away from the home, and that might be, violence from other kids in the home. It might be a sense of not belonging in the home. And then pull factors are those that the perpetrator usually puts in place, and that's, things like, like I talked about before, attention and a sense of, false love, or, access to drugs and alcohol. So really getting the carers in the houses to pay attention to these push and pull factors, and to increase the protective factors around children and young people. So, for example, making the house a really welcoming space, cooking together, doing activities with the kids that make them feel at home, that they want to do, getting them re-engaged in school or training. So really countering those push and pull factors. So the strategy 3 is really about what we do when kids are already experiencing one of those forms of child sexual abuse. And perhaps the one I'll just mention is the response to child sexual exploitation. So there are already kind of systems set up between child protection, police and community service organisations in Victoria that work together to respond when a child is being sexually exploited. So the role of the carers in the houses in that multi-agency response is very much an evidence gathering role. So they will be, if a perpetrator turns up in a car collecting registration numbers, collecting any data that they can from children's phones, if that's possible, and sharing any names and places that they hear children might be sexually exploiting, sharing all that information with police so that police can disrupt the exploitation. And we're seeing some really lovely examples of that working at the moment. The carers and police and child protection pulling together. We also have in Victoria the sexual exploitation practice leaders who belong to the Department Families, Fairness and Housing, but do really lead a lot of that multi-agency working. Okay, so just I want to hand over to Molly, but quickly, in terms of the evaluation findings in Resi Care, we really found that when carers were, capacity built and taught about sexual health and safety, there were 10 topics that we focused on that related to the 3 forms of abuse. When they were sort of capacity built to have those conversations with kids, they started to have those brave conversations with children and young people. And actually what we found was that as they had those conversations, the quality of the relationship between the carers and the children and young people improved. And that kind of improvement in the quality of the relationship acted as a very strong protective factor against the 3 forms of sexual abuse. So there was, greater comfort in disclosing abuse, so children, young people felt more comfortable talking to carers about any abuse that had happened or that they were worried was happening to, one of their friends, etc. And there was, an improved, knowledge of around harmful sexual behaviour and the indicators of the 3 target forms of abuse. So I haven't really talked about the pilot in foster care so much today, but similarly, what we found there was that, when, the sexual health and safety knowledge of case managers and carers was enhanced, and carers felt this great sense of being given permission to talk about sex with children, because previously they'd felt that if they went into that space with children, they would be accused of grooming children. So they expressed a great sense of relief. Oh, I can talk about, pornography. I can talk about consent. I can talk about, other sexual health and safety issues. So they became more comfortable and confident having these brave conversations. The kids engaged with the brave conversations. And through the use of the sexual health and safety plan, which I've mentioned before, which brings the 3 strategies together, through the use of that plan, the case managers working with the carers on those plans, really triggering the sexual safety response when there were indicators of harmful sexual behaviour, child sexual exploitation or dating violence. And there was a very strong focus, which has continued across McKillop, of escalating practice when it stalls, because practice involved in responding to these forms of abuse is complex and involves different players, and it can stall at any, at multiple points. So really escalating cases to senior management when there was practice stalling became really important, and having an attitude of absolutely not tolerating any form of sexual abuse for any child in care. Okay, I think that's my last one. I'll hand over to you now, Molly, to sort of bring to life all the theory.
Thank you so much, Gemma. My name is Molly. I'm on Gadigal land today, and I'm going to try and speak for about 20 minutes, and then hopefully we have time for questions. But as Ashley said at the start, if there's anything that pops in your mind, please feel free to put it in the chat box or interrupt, because I'm happy to answer any questions as we go along. I wanted in my time today to, like Gemma said, she has this wonderful, rich research and my experiences in bringing to life. So I thought I'm going to talk for a bit on this first slide, Gemma. So I thought I'd talk to you about what it feels like in practice. But before I do that, I thought I'd talk about kind of how it changed my practice as well. So in 2006, I'd been halfway through a law degree, realized I didn't want to do it, and I wanted to do youth work. So I started a certificate in youth work, and I heard along the way that the best way to get ahead and experience is to try out residential care, because they're always desperate for workers. And so I thought I'd give it a go. I probably had like a few months of certificate training, very minimal training. And my first shift, I was in a 4-bedroom home with 4 17-year-old boys. They all had really significant trauma backgrounds, like family violence, sexual abuse, neglect, and they were all placed living together. And it would be me and one other adult caring for them 24/7. Where they're in 10-hour shifts as well. So it can be quite hard to build relationships, because often the kids are up all night and asleep all day. Like Gemma said, there's problems with school engagement. And so on a daily basis, these boys would use really sexualized language. I was in my early 20s. I'd often get called sexual names. There would be displays of inappropriate sexual behaviors, maybe like exposing themselves. The young boys were also really at risk at nighttime. They would go out, they would be roaming in the city, racing cars. They'd often return with substances and alcohol that they didn't have the money for. So we kind of had some assumption that they were provided by older people that they didn't know. And as I mentioned, I only had a few weeks of youth work training. I really didn't know what to say or do. My only experience of teenagers was my younger brothers, and I certainly hadn't seen any of these kind of behaviors growing up. So I really felt quite lost as to what to do. And so I think and even like Gemma talks about this stuff like sexual exploitation and harmful sexual behaviors. I had no idea what those words mean. I think the first time I saw a behavior support plan telling me what to do if the boys went missing, it said something like at risk for sexual exploitation. And I was too embarrassed to even ask what it meant. So I probably Googled it on my phone so that I felt somewhat confident in this role. This is a long time ago before mandatory training and things like that were introduced. The way that I decided to respond to the boys was to say, that's inappropriate. I felt like it was a way to let them know that there was a boundary that existed, that what they were doing wasn't right. And to be honest, it felt like the message was sinking in, because anytime the boys were watching a show and said something sexual, before I could even open my mouth, they'd look at me and be like, that's inappropriate. Or if they swore, they'd be like, oh, hold on, Molly's going to tell us it's inappropriate. So I felt like even though it was a bit playful, there was some kind of learning happening. So I didn't really think it was harmful what I was doing. It had some success. I was also super naive to the risk they were at the community. I think there was a lot of really poor gender stereotyping happening at that time. In fact, one of the houses I worked at had this rule that because kids in care have to be independent when they're 17, they have to leave residential care. We needed to prepare them for the real world. And the rule was that if a boy called for a pickup and it was dark, he was big enough to get himself home. But if a girl called for a pickup, they would be vulnerable, so we would pick them up. So there was lots of really kind of awful strategies that were based on gender stereotypes and really naive to the risk that these kids were facing. I think also the community around the children were really naive to the risk. I remember the first time I had to call a police officer because I watched a young girl get picked up by a really scary looking older person. She was really substance affected on ice, incoherent. She was a diabetic who hadn't taken her medication. And I quickly called 000 because I thought she was about to die or be really harmed. And they were like, oh, that's not an emergency. And then I called 000 again, hoping to get a different operator. And they said, no, it's not an emergency. And then I called the 000 review board, which I didn't even know existed. And they said, no, it's not an emergency. So not only within our home, but within our community, there was a real absence of understanding about what young people were experiencing. Most of the time, if a young person is approached by a perpetrator online and being groomed, the main reason they don't tell an adult is they think they're going to get in trouble, that they were on a dodgy website or they were in a space where a perpetrator might be, and that people are going to think that there's something wrong with them. So this is kind of when I made a shift in my career and I decided to follow Power to Kids as my permanent role. And now I teach it to people in the out-of-home care sector across Australia. And I hear from carers that they have the same experience as I do in feeling really kind of empowered to start having these conversations and giving young people a sense of safety to talk to us. I think this program was originally called Respecting Sexual Safety. And Robin, who worked with Gemma on the project, said that a kid said that was a bad name and said, what you're doing is giving power to kids. And really, that's what I see the program doing every day. So Gemma, I might just quickly share, I'll see if you could stop sharing. I'm going to share an example of what it looks like for a child to be supported by Power to Kids. And I'm going to start by showing you the safety plan that Gemma mentioned. So you would put the identifying factors for a young person, and we would put their history. So this is something I've made up, but it's very common. I put that this young person experienced violence in utero until while she was in a maternal care, violence perpetrated by partners, exposure to mother's mental health. The mother has experienced sexual violence, the child sharing pornography with other kids in their class or in their house, and that this young person in 2020 said that someone raped them and they haven't received any support for that. In special considerations, we'll write, Lucy's had to move so many times, so she doesn't really trust people, so you might have a hard time talking to her at the start. She hasn't attended any high school, so reading and writing resources aren't going to be very helpful. You might need to use YouTube videos or games. Regulation, she might escalate quickly, so have a plan around how you're going to manage that. And then we go down to strength. So she likes arts and crafts, so maybe we'll do an art and craft activity about sexual health. She likes YouTube, so we can get some good YouTube videos. As part of Power to Kids, carers get access to our library of resource, because as you can imagine, if you're a professional and you want to talk to a kid about pornography, you don't really want to Google pornography on your computer because you don't know what's going to come up. And so Power to Kids has done all of that work for you and filtered through the internet for like the best resources. And some of them are YouTube, some of them are comics. Then down here, Gemma talked about teaching carers the signs to look out for or the risk factors. So here we would list the indicating factors. So Lucy's going missing 15 minutes to overnight. The longest time she was missing was 3 weeks. We're seeing her use substances and she's coming home with unexplained money or gifts. The indicators of harmful sexual behaviors is that we've categorized it as problematic. She's sharing pornography, she's exposing herself to carers and possibly being coercive to her younger friends. So we're saying, yes, we need to engage prevention strategy 3, which Gemma talked about, and we haven't done a safety plan, so we need to do one. We're then going to say, we want to talk to Lucy about respectful relationships and her sexual health. We want to update a plan with police on what we'll do when she's missing. We want to refer to a health service, and we want to give people around her a copy of this plan. And then on the back pages of the plan are the topics you can talk to kids about, the indicating factors for the 3 areas of sexual abuse. So these are the indicating factors for harmful sexual behavior. These are the signs to look out for sexual exploitation. And these are the signs to look out for dating violence. I'll go back to the slides when you get a chance, Gemma, but effectively we're handing to carers on a 1-page document exactly what they need to know about their child and what are the supports that they can have. I did see there was a question, how to apply the lessons you've learned in mainstream sex education curriculum in our schools. It's a really interesting question. I might, Gemma can add to it at the end, but one of the things that I would say is the trickiest part in having a conversation with these young people is that it needs to be trauma informed. And I think sometimes in a school setting, teachers might not have that trauma informed training. So we would, like I had a boy come home from school once and he's like, I can't believe you told my whole class I was sexually abused. Like, how dare you? And he'd had a big outburst at school. He'd been given detention. I was like, I didn't do that. And he's like, well, we were talking about sex today and everyone in the class was looking at me. So I had to, throw my desk and run out because he felt like because of his history, that wasn't catered to in the way that information was delivered. And of course, no one in his class did know, but he really felt that. But we can answer more about that at the end if we have time. Gemma, just to the next slide, please. So as Gemma said, the first strategy would be carers in the house having these conversations like the plan said, providing some sex ed, and I'll show you an example of what that looks like. Strategy 2 would be that they've written all those signs that they've seen for her, and they're going to start to try and address those signs and have protective factors. And prevention strategy 3 would be connecting with people around the child. The next slide. Shannon asked, do the people get to see what's documented about them? I'll show you an example of a plan. And yes, it's written in child-friendly language that a young person could engage, but it would also depend on the young person's, that safety plan would dictate kind of their tolerance for a document like that, but all the documents are prepared in a way that a child could see them. This is an example of what a brave conversation sounds like. It's a short video, and then I've just got 2 more slides to show you. But this is a brave conversation. We have 3 acronyms that we use with carers to help them. You can imagine as a carer, I think it's important to note that when we first did the program, we had a sexual health nurse who was amazing, but often children, you'll see in the strategies, one of the things was relational safety, and kids need to feel safe to talk to the person. And so we have carers who say, it might be 3 a.m. and I'm doing the dishes, and a kid walks up and says, I'm having sex with my boyfriend tomorrow. And if you're on your feet and you don't really know what to say, we talk about these acronyms being a guide to carers to make sure they've really had the conversation in the most helpful way possible. So the 3 acronyms are on the side. They're care, talk, and yarn. Yarn is a term that was made by our Aboriginal cultural advisors on how to have these conversations with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people. And you would layer that with either the talk or the care model. Care is about consent, age, respect, equality, and talk is more about being brave and taking that initiative. So this video is about a young person who's come to a carer. Their phone has developed a virus on it and isn't working, their phone, and the carer suspects that this virus may have come from a porn site. And so this is a video we show carers to teach them how to take that initiative with young people.
Come on, let's have a sit down and chat about it.
Okay.
So it sounds like you're really worried about this virus. I think I can help you get rid of it, but did you want to talk about how it might have gotten there?
I'm fine. I just want my phone fixed.
I get that. And there's no shame. There's plenty of websites that can put viruses on our phones. I don't want you to feel embarrassed or worried about what I might think.
I'm not worried, really. I just want you to fix my phone.
I totally get that. But just so you know, I can see that the virus has come from a porn site, and it's totally normal to be curious. There's nothing to be shameful about.
I mean, it's normal. Everyone watches it.
You're right. Everyone does do it. I guess my only question for you then is, are you feeling safe? Because some adults and young people can put pressure on other young people to watch pornography. Is that something you've experienced?
No, nobody else is making me watch it, and everyone does it. It's like normal.
My other question about your safety would be about what you're watching. It is normal for some people, but it is important for us to talk about some of the dangers or concerns with watching pornography too. Pornography can depict scenes of violence and even rape, and it can be very upsetting to watch. Have you watched anything that has made you feel uncomfortable or worried?
I mean, I guess there's been a bit of violence that made me a bit uncomfortable.
Right. And I'm sorry you've seen that, because it is incredibly hard to see. So I guess what I want to make sure is really clear is that the sex that you see in pornography is more violent and is sort of more like stage sex, and it's quite different to real sex. I really want you to know that you shouldn't feel pressure to perform like anything you've seen in pornography.
I mean, sometimes it does get a bit violent, but some people like it that way.
That's right. And it all comes back to consent. How would you define consent?
I'm not really quite sure.
That's okay. Consent is to freely agree to do something without feeling pressured by anyone to do anything that you feel uncomfortable with.
Yeah, I know that.
That's great. Another thing to remember is that porn doesn't really talk about using condoms and protecting from pregnancy and STIs. Is that something you want to talk more about?
I mean, I guess like condoms and that kind of thing. I don't want to get any yucky diseases.
Well, we can head down to Headspace today to pick up some free condoms. And Anna, the sexual health nurse, she knows all about this, and I'm happy to make an appointment for you to see her if you'd like.
Well, maybe we could go to Headspace and then I'll decide.
Well, let's get this virus fixed up for you and let's head over to Headspace. But thank you so much for talking to me today, and I'm always here to talk about these things. Let's chat more in the car on our way there.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Thank you. So that video is the talk model. We filmed the videos with carers who have experience. They're all real carers. So you know, one of the great things is after we play those videos, we often get feedback from carers like, oh, I would have done that differently, or the kid that I work with would have got angry, so I would have had to approach it a bit differently. And so it forms for really great conversation. We show videos for each of the models. So just to kind of signpost where you would be with the young person. So the first, we do the safety plan before we start talking to a young person. We start having brave conversations, and maybe for that young person, they said, oh, we'll go look at condoms. So that's the next phase. So maybe a few weeks later, you would say, hey, you know, the other day we went and got condoms. Do you know what they're used for? Have you learnt much about STIs? Or, and I've got this really cool game. And we wrote on that plan that Lucy likes arts and crafts. So I might print out this paper, which has a game around myths and facts. And I might say, Lucy, can you laminate that for me? And we'll cut it up and we're going to play a game and really involve the young person. I had a house in South Australia the other day say their kids just really can't tolerate conversation. So they've set up a myth jar and a fact jar in the house. And they've given each kid a few of these, and over the week they're going to try and get them to put in myth or fact, and then at the end of the week they'll talk about it. So we give carers access to a whole resource library of different tools to engage young people. Like I said, YouTube videos, games like this, pamphlets. There's resources that are specific for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people. There's resources that are specific for the LGBTQI plus community. There's resources that are specific for people with different learning abilities as well. The next slide, Gemma, is an example of one of the things we talked about was creating a safety plan once you had indicating factors. So you do the main safety plan and then you say, hey, you know what, this young person is at risk for sexual exploitation. So we're going to make a safety plan. And this is one of the documents, like the question asked before, that you could really do with a young person. You would see here that the safety plan refers to things that the individual can do, the house can do to help them, the organisation, and the overall culture around the child. You'll see things like this young person's put conversations with carers, have excuses if the groomer contacts me. We have kids who have code words like blueberry means come pick me up. The carers are going to get number plates, you know, be really assertive in asking people why they're picking up children. They're going to get intervention orders if they need to. The organisation is going to try and match the children appropriately. They're going to try and build a relationship with police, etc. A big part of the plan is the missing from care strategy. You can see up there, I've put an example of a text we would coach carers to send young people like, hey, wanted to just let you know we're missing you around the house. It's quiet, it's boring without you. I'm making lasagna, which is your favorite food. And later I'm driving around the area. How about I pick you up and we eat the lasagna and have a movie night together? And that's building on that relational safety. All of the safety plans come with an attachment, which is in the bottom right-hand corner, which has suggestions on what you can fill the plan with if the child or the team don't have ideas of what to put in themselves. The next slide, I think I might be, yeah, I think that's a bit of an introduction. Normally the course goes for a day, so I've just tried to squeeze in what we can.
Thanks, Molly. That was terrific. So back to you, Ash, for questions.
Hi, that was really fantastic. Yes, I've been scribbling notes down during that whole session. Great. We had a couple of questions in the chat, which you've answered a few, Molly, but did you, Gemma, want to add anything to Jenny's question? Wondering how to apply the lessons you've learnt to writing mainstream sex ed curriculum for teachers to use in our schools.
Yeah, so it's funny you should mention that. And hi, Jenny. Nice to have a question from you. So we're actually in the very, very early stages of tailoring Powder Kids as a program to trial in schools. So I don't think we're quite ready to say how Powder Kids could work in schools. But it's definitely something that's, you know, on our agenda. I think, you know, Molly's point about, you know, creating a safe space we talk about creating a safe space before and around having a brave conversation, and being able to do that when there are lots of other children around could be challenging, but it also, you know, there might be ways to work in groups that have brave conversations in groups that are sort of slightly different. But I think that, you know, upskilling educators and other staff in schools around how to have brave conversations as opportunities arise over the course of the day, and also how to, you know, identify indicators of sexual harm is incredibly important, because they are ideally placed to be recognising those signs, and they're spending, you know, a lot of time with kids. So I'll just leave that question there because I know we're short for time.
Great. Oh, here you go. More questions are popping up in the chat. Can we access any of the resources now, or do we need to do the course? Who, when, how do people find out about the course?
You can put the link to booking the course in the chat box. It's
great.
And then through signing up to the course, you would get access to the resources. I think that because it's so important to do the setting a safe space, etc., it's important to do the course and then gain access to the resources, because a lot of, like Gemma said, that brave conversation model is not only to have the resources, but how to present them to a child. I put it in the chat box to hosts and panelists, but Ashley, maybe you can send that out.
I'm just going to chuck it as well now under the question. Great. We don't have very much time, but I had a question that I wanted to ask Molly. When you were talking about initially when you were working in this space and how that young woman who was substance affected was getting in the car and there was nothing that the police could do, does that sit differently now? Like, how do you engage police in a way that they're able to help in that situation? I was quite shocked when you said that, actually, because I can imagine being like you and frantically thinking, oh, but who else am I going to call to get someone to come and assist with this?
I think like everyone in this room maybe works in like the health sector or social sector, and like we're understaffed, we have casuals coming in and out, and police really, one of the things from Power to Kids was about building relationships with community around the child, getting everyone who's in the child's life on the same page. And so actually speaking to police, you know, their feedback to us was that they're also in a similar boat where they might not have, they have staff shortages, they have people who signed up to do high-speed car chases coming out to talk to children, and so the broad spectrum of their job is huge. Engaging them and showing them around some of the resources and talking to them about Power to Kids really helped us to get on the same page. I had phenomenal disruption of sexual exploitation with our local police, where they were accessing Facebook to find perpetrators, knocking on perpetrators' doors. We had a young person who set up geotagging on her phone, and if she was in a situation where I felt unsafe, she was directly geotagged to the police where she was, and they would drive and pick her up straight away because it was unsafe for carers. So we've done welcome events in states and built really good relationships with police and carers. And so, yeah, from 2016 to now, we have a different experience in my region. But Gemma,
thanks, Molly. I just thought, I just thought I'd add, you know, when we were doing Power to Kids and trialing Power to Kids, we found we could, you know, control quite a lot of what was happening internally to McKillop, but what was happening with multi-agency partners was, you know, a much bigger fish to fry, if you like. So we've now got another project going, which is called the DICE project, which is the Disrupting Child Sexual Exploitation project. It's a big linkage grant across 3 states. The site in Victoria is in the southern region, and we're working with the 3 sockets, so the sexual offence teams, and really drilling down into you know, what best practice looks like when kids are highly at risk of sexual exploitation, and for situations like that, what do we do so that police are acting immediately and getting the information they need? So there's really good pockets of practice, but we're really looking to improve that practice and to make it more consistent as well with the DICE project. So happy to share details about that if anyone's interested.
Great, thanks, Gemma. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. Again, excellent session. This has been recorded, so it will be put up onto our website and or YouTube page. So please share the link when it comes out with your colleagues if you think they'll be interested. Yeah, it was a wonderful session, and thank you so much again, Gemma and Molly and Esther in the background. Really appreciate you joining us today.